For this screencast, I want to go over a session I had with a student. Needed some assistance with the essay for the third marking period. So this was the thesis, um, rough draft. Due to the emergence of the women's lib movement. So now with this, the student is arguing that we're locked into the women lib movement. Women in the 70s embraced clothes that allowed for individuality, such as masculine and ethnic influence clothing. So we have a lot of issues going on here. Is this about individuality? Now we're getting into masculine and then ethnic, and then they're arguing ultimately that by doing this, they're going to avoid clothes that oppose this ideology. So it's a little confusing here. And after meeting with the student, we actually broke this down and changed everything. Now the student already had some sources. So what I did was I went into Google and I just typed in fashion in the 70s JSTOR. And then these were the articles that had come up. And these were the two. When I looked at this one here, I think this was the first one that we looked at. Now this one is odd because for this one, I think it was this one here. Yeah, this article really talked about punk music. So punk was a genre of music. And here they're looking at in the 1970s, which ultimately is what the student is writing about, the 1970s. They're talking about punk style and how it varied, where these individuals were dressing differently with t-shirts. Here they even have a swastika in there. They're cutting up their jeans. So that really is not in line with the student's thesis, which is here because they're not planning on writing about anything related to punk music. But it was a style of dress that influenced the way women in particular dress, especially if they were part of that movement. We then, with that Google search, found this article here. And as I skimmed through this one, let's see, no, this is the same one. This one here. Cutting one's hair was just one example of how some feminists in the 1960s and 70s rejected traditional styles of feminine behavior. So now I started to think, well, why don't we change your thesis? And now we're going to write about feminists. And let's see what these feminist women are doing. We already know that the punk women are cutting their shirts and jeans and so on. But these women are buying into a cultural music group. I'll just put this music style here. Whereas these women here seem to be very political. Let's go back to that article here. Keep mixing the two up. They then go on, when I skimmed through this, and I didn't read this article in the moment. It was just something that I was skimming to kind of help the student along. But at some point, they started to talk about the Miss America beauty pageant. And the Miss America beauty pageant challenged what it meant to look like a man or woman. Let's see, right down here where they're starting here to talk about women protesting the Miss America beauty pageant. So the conclusion for this article here is that the feminist women who are more political, their style of dress is what it is. That is outlined in this particular article. The example that they used was the hair. The hair was shortened, and so these women are trying to really change the traditional, for lack of a better word, pre-1970s style of dress for women. Then we did another JSTOR search, and we had come across, where is that article? We came across this link here, and this link, no, not that one, this one. So this link is on JSTOR, and it's actually giving you a summary of a book. The name of the book is right here. So the student, you really don't have much. It's just like 5 or 6 paragraphs. What we then did was we took the name of the book and we found the book here, and we also realized that there were some sample pages here. Now, what's interesting about this section here, the name of the book, The Woman Dressed for Success, and in the summary that I found on JSTOR, that I now lost once again, this thing right here, they're trying to summarize that book, and it's totally fine. I would not prefer to cite this, but because you have access to the book on Amazon, but now we're introduced to another type of woman. So the woman here is the working woman, and the working women are trying to have employers revise the dress code. They talked about skirts, and so we have 3 different types of women. So my recommendation to the student is simply, well, why don't you just change your thesis from this and make your thesis something about how the way women dressed was dependent on the cultural group that they belong to. You know, if you're somebody who was part of the punk movement, if you're a working class woman, or if you are a political feminist woman, then that determined the way you dressed. And in the paragraph, you know, I'm not really coming up with a thesis here, just a thesis idea. But the thesis idea is that um, women's dress depended on the group belonged to, something along those lines. And then the evidence that they're going to use is that the punk women dress this way, that the feminist women dressed a certain way, and that the working class women worked another way. And what would be even better is if we could come up with some other examples. So I went into ProQuest, and if those of you who've never used ProQuest, it's on the site. S Brunswick is the password and login, and you can search newspapers. So I searched some newspapers, and looking at this site, which seems to have changed, I did a search here for women dress, and I put 1970 to 1979 because the student is writing specifically about the 70s. And there's that one article that I found. Oh man, I just messed it up. I had the article kind of ready to go somewhere. Was it this one? Tribute to a Black designer celebrates decade promise. I don't know what that's about, but if we could find an article that talks about the way Black women dressed in the 1970s, that would be yet another group. Careful shopper. This one, the careful shopper. So this seems to be an advertisement. Yeah, I mean, here they're giving you, you know, it's like a sales pitch, because the way I have this search is it's looking at the New York Times newspapers. So, you know, you might get an advertisement. And if you want to analyze ads, that's fine as well. Travolta, Urban Cowboy. So this says something about hairstyle. When we click page view, you should get the newspaper article here. So you want to be careful about the dates. So this one is actually dated 1980. And so that's giving you the date there. This one, female workers protest scanty uniforms. So for this article here, we go to page view, and it'll give us the page of how it appeared in the newspaper. Again, we have one from the 1980s, so I don't necessarily know if that's going to help, but I just wanted to show the use of the site. So you would have to limit this to maybe in the 1970s and see what we find. But this would be a different type of source. Like this one right here, Iranian women protest dress code. This would be perfect if it was in the 1970s and if it was about, you know, American women. I mean, I'm just browsing through the site, which is what I did with the student as we're working through all of this. Anyway, hopefully this helps. But the conclusion, I think, with the student was started out with this thesis, and she wanted to write primarily about women lib. And then from women lib, we broke that down. Like, if she was just going to write about the way women dress within the women lib movement, you would have to find some sources that just argue that particular point. And we do have that one article here that might allow you to kind of get away with that. But I guess another group we could look at would be disco. I'm not sure if we did a disco 1970 style of dress. You would come up with something. And I don't know what that. These are all ads. I don't know if putting JSTOR here is going to help. There you go. Look at that. Disco clothing, female sexual motivation. That they're talking about looks like Austrian discotheques, but they might still reference what's going on in the United States. I didn't read through these sources because I kind of just wanted to do this in the moment as things kind of popped in my mind as I was processing some of the stuff that I found in the moment. I feel about disco and its discontent. So yeah, you would have to try to search in here, but that would be another thing to kind of look at. This actually doesn't even count. If you could find anything in here that talks about the way women in disco dress, that would be another group that you can put here. And now it just becomes about you saying, all right, well, they dress. And your whole point that you're trying to prove is that women dress depended on the group that they belong to. So I just wanted to kind of address this point because I think the students started out with this initial thesis, and then based on the research that we found, kind of went into a different direction. So don't be afraid to change the thesis and the research.